Princess Zara stood on the crystal balcony of her father's palace, watching the twin suns set over the purple mountains of Zarian Prime. Her silver skin shimmered in the fading light, and her four arms moved gracefully as she adjusted the ceremonial robes that marked her as heir to the Zarian Empire. Tomorrow would bring another meeting with potential suitors from across the galaxy, all seeking to unite their worlds with hers through marriage. The empire her father ruled stretched across 15 star systems, each populated by different alien races that had sworn loyalty to the Zarian crown 3 centuries ago. Some were tall and thin like walking trees, others were short and round like living boulders, and many had abilities that seemed magical to other species. The Zarians themselves were known for their intelligence and diplomatic skills, which had helped them build the largest peaceful alliance in this part of the galaxy. But despite all this power and influence, Zara felt something was missing. The galaxy seemed too quiet, too predictable. Her tutors had filled her mind with stories from the old days, when brave warriors from distant worlds would arrive to challenge impossible odds and save entire civilizations. These tales always featured a mysterious race called humans, who supposedly came from a small blue planet on the edge of known space, according to the ancient texts. Humans possessed no special powers like telepathy or energy manipulation. They could not fly without machines, could not survive in space without protection, and lived for only a fraction of the time that most other species did. Yet somehow, these fragile beings had become the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever known. They fought not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they refused to give up when others would surrender. Her favorite story told of a human named Marcus who had single-handedly defended a space station against a fleet of mechanical invaders for 3 days straight. With no sleep and limited supplies, he had used clever tactics and pure determination to hold them off until reinforcements arrived. Another tale spoke of a human woman called Sarah who had walked into a nest of poisonous creatures to rescue alien children. Even though she knew the toxins would slowly kill her, these stories fascinated Zara because they showed a different kind of strength than what she saw around her. The powerful races in her father's empire relied on their natural abilities or advanced technology, but humans seemed to find strength in their hearts and minds, pushing beyond what should have been possible for such a weak species. Unfortunately, most scholars now believed humans were just myths. No one had seen or heard from them in over 200 years. Some said they had destroyed themselves in wars. Others believed they had simply retreated to their small corner of space and cut off contact with the galaxy. A few insisted they had never existed at all, claiming the stories were just inspirational fiction created by ancient storytellers. Zara's personal guard captain, a massive creature called Thoric with stone-like skin and glowing red eyes, approached behind her. His heavy footsteps announced his presence long before he spoke. "Princess, your father wishes to see you in the throne room," Thoric rumbled in his deep voice. "The ambassadors from the Vex Confederation have arrived early for tomorrow's negotiations." The Vex were one of the most aggressive races in the known galaxy, with sharp claws, acid spit, and a culture built around conquest and domination. They had been expanding their territory rapidly over the past decade, swallowing up smaller worlds and enslaving their populations. Recently, they had begun making threats against the Zarian Empire itself, claiming that Zara's father was too weak to deserve his throne. "Tell me, Thoric," Zara said without turning around, "do you believe the stories about human warriors are true?" The massive guard was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke carefully. "Princess, I have lived for over 300 years and fought in many battles across the galaxy. I have seen brave warriors from dozens of species perform incredible feats. But the things described in those human stories, they seem impossible even for the strongest races." Zara nodded slowly. She had expected this answer, but part of her had hoped that someone as experienced as Thoric might have encountered evidence of human existence. What if we needed warriors like that now? What if our diplomatic skills and our allies' natural abilities were not enough to protect our people? This question seemed to surprise Thoric. Are you concerned about the Vex delegation, Princess? Your father has handled aggressive negotiations before. The Vex are different, Zara replied, finally turning to face her guard. They do not want territory or trade agreements. They want to prove that strength is the only thing that matters in the galaxy, and they see our peaceful empire as a sign of weakness. I fear that diplomacy alone will not be enough this time. As they walked back into the palace, Zara could not shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. The marble halls echoed with their footsteps, and the ancient tapestries depicting great moments in Zarian history seemed to watch them pass. Each artwork showed her ancestors solving problems through wisdom and negotiation, bringing together different species in harmony and mutual benefit. But what would happen if they faced an enemy that could not be reasoned with? What if the Vex decided that the only way to deal with the Zarian Empire was to destroy it completely? Zara had studied military tactics and strategy, but she had never actually been in a real battle. None of her generation had. Because the Empire had been at peace for so long, the throne room was already filled with activity when they arrived. Diplomatic staff hurried back and forth, preparing documents and setting up translation equipment. Her father, Emperor Kazan, sat on his crystal throne discussing strategy with his advisors. His forearms moved in complex gestures as he spoke, and his silver skin showed the slight dulling that came with age and worry. When Zara entered, all conversation stopped and everyone bowed respectfully. She took her place at her father's side, trying to project confidence even though her mind was still filled with thoughts of ancient warriors and impossible odds. The Vex ships will arrive within the hour, her father said quietly. Their demands will likely be unreasonable, but we must at least listen to what they have to say. Perhaps we can find a peaceful solution that satisfies both sides. Zara wanted to believe this was possible, but something deep inside her suggested that the days of easy diplomacy were coming to an end. As she waited for the negotiations to begin, she found herself wishing that somewhere out in the vast galaxy, the legendary human warriors were more than just stories. The Vex delegation arrived with a show of force that made everyone in the palace nervous. Their ships were dark, angular vessels that looked more like weapons than diplomatic transports. As they landed in the royal courtyard, armed Vex soldiers poured out in perfect formation, their black armor gleaming and their weapons clearly visible. Despite this being a peaceful meeting, Ambassador Krex led the group into the throne room. He was larger than most of his species, with extra rows of sharp teeth and scars covering his scaled green skin. His yellow eyes swept across the assembled Zarian court with obvious contempt, and when he spoke, acid dripped from his words. Emperor Kazan, Krex began without any formal greeting. The Vex Confederation grows tired of your empire's weakness. You hide behind pretty words and meaningless treaties while real power reshapes the galaxy around you. Emperor Kazan remained calm, his four hands folded peacefully in his lap. Ambassador Krex, we welcome you to our world in the spirit of friendship and mutual understanding. Please, tell us what concerns your people so that we might work together to address them. Krex laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. Work together? Your empire controls 15 star systems filled with resources and strategic positions, yet you contribute nothing to galactic security. You make trade deals with weaklings and offer protection to species that deserve to be conquered. Princess Zara felt her temper rising but kept her expression neutral. She had studied Vex culture extensively and knew that showing emotion would be seen as a sign of weakness. Still, it was difficult to listen to their traditions and values being dismissed so carelessly. The Zarian Empire has maintained peace in this region for over 3 centuries, Emperor Kazan replied evenly. Our allies prosper through cooperation rather than conquest. Surely this benefits everyone, including the Vex Confederation. Peace, Krex spat, literally spitting acid onto the pristine floor. Peace is what the weak call their surrender to the strong. The universe respects only power, and your soft empire proves that you have forgotten this basic truth. He gestured to one of his soldiers, who stepped forward carrying a large metal case. When opened, it revealed what appeared to be a collection of weapons and armor pieces, all bearing the symbols of various alien species. These belong to the rulers of 12 worlds that thought diplomacy could protect them, Krex continued. They believed, like you, that words were stronger than weapons. Now their people serve the Confederation, and their resources fuel our expansion across the galaxy. Zara noticed that her father's silver skin had taken on a slightly darker hue, a sign of stress that only those close to him would recognize. The other diplomats in the room shifted uncomfortably, and even the normally unflappable Thoric had moved his hand closer to his weapon. What exactly does the Confederation want from the Zarian Empire? Emperor Kazan asked, his voice still steady but with an edge that had not been there before. Krex's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile on a friendlier species. Simple: surrender, hand over control of your military forces, your trade routes, and your resource worlds. In exchange, we will allow your people to continue existing as servants rather than eliminating them entirely. The throne room fell completely silent. Even the servants stopped moving, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the translation devices. Zara felt her heart racing as the full meaning of the ultimatum became clear. This was not a negotiation at all. It was a demand for complete submission, and if we refuse? Zara heard herself asking. Though she had not planned to speak, Krex turned his yellow gaze toward her, studying her with the interest a predator might show toward potential prey. Ah, the princess speaks. How refreshing to see some fire in this palace of weaklings. If you refuse, young one, then the Confederation will take by force what you will not give freely. Your choice is between peaceful surrender and violent conquest. Emperor Kazan raised one hand slightly, a signal for his daughter to remain silent. Ambassador, surely there is some middle ground we can explore. The Zarian Empire has always been willing to discuss reasonable compromises. Compromise? Krex roared, his voice echoing throughout the chamber. You still do not understand. There's no compromise with destiny. The strong rule, the weak serve, and those who resist are destroyed. This is the natural order of the universe. He began pacing in front of the throne, his clawed feet clicking against the marble floor. Your ancestors may have built something impressive here, but you have grown soft and complacent. When was the last time any of you faced real danger? When did you last prove your worth in battle? You surround yourselves with comfort and call it civilization, but you have forgotten what it means to truly fight for something. Zara found herself thinking once again about the ancient stories of human warriors. According to the legends, humans had faced exactly this kind of situation countless times throughout their history. They have been outnumbered, outgunned, and given ultimatums by enemies who seemed impossible to defeat. Yet somehow, they had found ways to prevail through courage, creativity, and sheer stubborn determination. Ambassador Krex, she said, standing up despite her father's warning glance, you speak of strength and weakness, but what you describe sounds more like bullying than true power. In our libraries, we have stories of warriors who proved their strength not by conquering the helpless, but by defending those who could not defend themselves. Krex stopped pacing and stared at her with genuine curiosity. Stories? You think to lecture me with fairy tales, princess? The galaxy is not a storybook where heroes always win and evil is always defeated. Perhaps not, Zara replied, surprised by her own boldness. But the greatest warriors in those stories came from a species that had no natural advantages, no superior technology, and no overwhelming numbers. They won because they refused to surrender even when victory seemed impossible. And what species was this? Krex asked, though his tone suggested he was humoring her rather than showing real interest. Humans, Zara said simply, for the first time since entering the throne room. Ambassador Krex looked genuinely surprised. Then he began laughing again, even more harshly than before. Humans? Those mythical creatures from children's bedtime stories? Princess, you disappoint me. I had hoped you might show more wisdom than your father, but instead you retreat into fantasy when faced with reality. You do not believe humans ever existed? Zara asked. Krex shrugged his massive shoulders. Perhaps they did, perhaps they did not. But if they were real, they are certainly gone now. No species that weak could survive long in a galaxy ruled by natural selection. The strong survive, the weak perish, and life continues. As the Vex ambassador spoke these words, Zara felt something shift inside her. Whether humans were real or imaginary, the values they represented in those ancient stories, courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for others, were exactly what her people needed now. The question was whether anyone still possessed such qualities in a galaxy that had grown, comfortable with the illusion of permanent peace. Emperor Kazan requested a recess to consider the Vex ultimatum, and Ambassador Krex agreed with obvious amusement. "Take all the time you need," the scarred alien said as his delegation filed out of the throne room. "We will remain here for 3 of your days. After that, we return to our fleet with your answer, and events will proceed accordingly." Once the Vex had left, the throne room erupted in concerned voices. Diplomatic advisors argued about possible responses while military commanders discussed defensive preparations. Through it all, Emperor Kazan sat quietly on his crystal throne, his 4 arms moving slowly as he processed the impossible situation they now faced. "Father," Zara approached him when the initial chaos had died down, "what are we really going to do? The Vex fleet is probably 10 times larger than our entire military." The Emperor looked at his daughter with tired eyes. "I have been in contact with our allies throughout the Empire. The problem is that most of them are facing similar threats from the Confederation. The Vex have been very clever, applying pressure to multiple worlds simultaneously so that none of us can help the others." This was worse than Zara had imagined. She had assumed that their allies would rally to defend the capital world, but if they were all under attack, then Zarian Prime would have to face the Confederation alone. "What about seeking help from outside the Empire?" she asked. "There are other major powers in the galaxy." "I have already tried," her father replied sadly. "The Galactic Council claims this is an internal matter. The Federation of Free Worlds is dealing with their own expansion conflicts. Everyone else either lacks the military strength to matter or fears that helping us would make them the Confederation's next target." Zara felt a growing sense of desperation. All her life, she had been taught that problems could be solved through intelligent negotiation and careful alliance building. But what happened when you faced an enemy that only understood force and you lacked the military power to resist them effectively? That night she found herself in the palace library, searching through the oldest archives for any information about humans that might be more than legend. The vast hall was filled with data crystals containing knowledge from across the Empire, including historical records that dated back thousands of years. Most of what she found repeated the same stories she already knew, tales of impossible heroism performed by a species that seemed too weak to accomplish such feats. But buried in some of the earliest records, she discovered references that suggested these stories might be based on actual events rather than pure fiction, a fragmentary transmission from over 300 years ago mentioned a human trading vessel that had helped evacuate civilians from a collapsing space station. Another ancient document described diplomatic contact with something called the Terran Federation, though the details were too corrupted to read clearly. Most intriguing was a star chart that showed the location of various known species, including a small notation marking the Sol system as the homeworld of humanity. According to the chart, this system was located in a remote region that most civilizations considered too far from major trade routes to be worth exploring. "Princess?" Captain Thoric's deep voice interrupted her research. "It is very late. Perhaps you should rest before tomorrow's meetings." Zara looked up from the glowing data display, realizing that she had been studying for hours without noticing the time. "Thoric, what would you do if you discovered that the ancient warrior legends were real? If there actually were humans somewhere out there who possessed the kind of courage described in these stories?" The massive guard considered this question seriously before answering. If such beings existed and could be contacted, it would certainly be worth the attempt. "But Princess, even if humans are real, what makes you think they would help us? According to your stories, they have had no contact with the galaxy for centuries." "They may have good reasons for avoiding involvement in our conflicts. This was a valid point that Zara had not fully considered. Even if humans existed and could be found, why would they risk their lives for an empire they had never been part of? The ancient stories suggested they helped others out of a sense of justice and compassion, but those were just stories. Real beings would probably want something in return for such a dangerous commitment. Maybe, she said slowly, they would help because it is the right thing to do. Thoric's red eyes glowed softly in the dim library lighting. Princess, with respect, that sounds like something from the fairy tales rather than practical politics. In my experience, species help each other when they have something to gain from the arrangement. Before Zara could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the palace. Red lights flashed, and the emergency communication system activated with an urgent message from the Space Defense Center. Alert! Unknown vessels detected approaching the system. Configuration does not match any known Confederation ships. Old defensive units to standby positions. Thoric immediately moved to escort Zara toward the secure areas of the palace, but she grabbed his arm with two of her hands. Wait, what if it is not another attack? What if someone actually came to help? Princess, we cannot take that risk, the guard captain replied firmly. Unknown ships arriving during a diplomatic crisis are more likely to be enemies than friends. But Zara was already moving toward the communication center, her mind racing with possibilities. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Just as the Empire faced its greatest threat in centuries, mysterious ships appeared from the depths of space. Either this was an incredible stroke of luck, or the galaxy was far more interconnected than anyone realized. The communication center was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Technicians monitored multiple displays showing the approaching vessels, while officers tried to establish contact with the unknown ships. The vessels themselves were unlike anything in the standard databases, sleek and functional rather than ornate or imposing, with a design philosophy that seemed to prioritize efficiency over intimidation. Any response to our hailing signals? The communications director asked. Negative, sir. But they are not broadcasting any hostile intent either. Their approach vector suggests they are planning to enter orbit rather than make an attack run. Emperor Kazan arrived a few minutes later. His ceremonial robes were replaced by practical attire suitable for a potential military crisis. Status report, he commanded. 3 ships of unknown origin, sir. Medium size, possibly exploratory or diplomatic vessels rather than military craft. They have not responded to our communications, but their behavior suggests peaceful intentions. Zara studied the displays showing the mysterious ships. Something about their design stirred a memory from her research in the ancient archives. The proportions were different from typical alien vessels, somehow more organic and less geometric, as if they had been built by beings who thought in terms of curves and flow rather than angles and efficiency. Father, she said quietly, I think we should prepare a diplomatic reception rather than a military response. The Emperor looked at her with surprise. Daughter, we have no idea who these beings are or what they want. Given our current situation with the Confederation, we must assume the worst until proven otherwise. But what if they represent our best hope? Zara insisted. What if the galaxy still contains allies we have never met? As she spoke these words, the communication station suddenly came alive with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was unlike anything they had heard before, neither harsh like the Vex nor musical like the Zirians, but somewhere in between with an odd quality that seemed almost familiar despite being completely alien. Zarian Prime. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Terran survey ship Endeavor. We received your distress beacon and have come to offer assistance. Permission to dock and meet with your leadership? The communication center fell completely silent. Every person present stared at the speakers as if they could not believe what they had just heard. Finally, Emperor Kazan found his voice. Did they say Terran? The docking bay had been hastily prepared to receive the human delegation, though no one was quite sure what to expect. Princess Zara stood beside her father and Captain Thoric, trying to control her excitement and nervousness as the sleek Terran vessel settled onto the landing platform. The ship was smaller than she had imagined, perhaps large enough for a crew of 20 or 30 beings, yet it radiated a sense of quiet confidence that impressed everyone watching. When the airlock opened, 3 figures emerged wearing simple uniforms of dark blue fabric with minimal decoration. The sight of them sent a wave of astonishment through the assembled Zarian court. They looked almost exactly as the ancient stories had described, bipedal beings with soft skin instead of scales or chitin, hair covering the tops of their heads, and faces that seemed designed more for expression than intimidation. The leader was clearly the woman who had identified herself as Captain Chun. She was shorter than most of the alien species present, but moved with a fluid grace that suggested both physical fitness and complete self-assurance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes swept across the reception committee with intelligent curiosity rather than fear or aggression. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a slight bow that managed to convey respect without submission. "Thank you for allowing us to dock. I am Captain Sarah Chun, and these are my colleagues, Lieutenant Commander James Torres and Dr. Elena Vasquez." Emperor Kazan recovered from his initial shock enough to respond appropriately. "Captain Chun, welcome to Zarian Prime. I am Emperor Kazan, and this is my daughter Princess Zara and Captain Thoric of our palace guard. Please forgive our surprise. We had believed that humans were ... extinct." Captain Chun smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and sad at the same time. "Not extinct, Your Majesty, but certainly much reduced from our former presence in this part of the galaxy. We have spent the past 2 centuries rebuilding our civilization after some rather difficult experiences with galactic politics." Dr. Vasquez, an older woman with graying hair and kind eyes, stepped forward slightly. "We understand you are facing a significant threat from the Vex Confederation. We have encountered them before, and we know how dangerous they can be when left unchecked." This statement caused a stir among the Zarian officials. If humans had actually fought the Vex before, then perhaps the ancient stories about their military prowess had some basis in reality after all. "You have experience with the Confederation?" Princess Zara asked, unable to keep the hope out of her voice. "Were you able to defeat them?" Lieutenant Commander Torres, a younger man with scars on his hands that suggested combat experience, answered carefully. "We have had several encounters with Vex expansion forces over the years. Our approaches to conflict resolution are somewhat different from theirs, which has led to mixed results." Captain Chun gestured toward the human ship. "Your Majesty, we have detailed intelligence about Confederation tactics and capabilities. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more secure location? We intercepted several of their communications while approaching your system, and the situation appears to be more urgent than we initially realized." Emperor Kazan immediately led the group toward the palace conference room, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. The presence of actual humans was miraculous enough, but if they possessed useful intelligence about the Vex threat, then their arrival might truly be the answer to his prayers. The conference room was one of the most secure locations in the palace, with crystal walls that prevented electronic surveillance and guards posted at every entrance. Once everyone was seated around the circular table, Captain Chun activated a small device that projected a 3-dimensional map of the star system. "According to our scans," she began, "the Confederation has positioned a substantial fleet just outside your system's detection range. The force includes at least 40 capital ships plus support vessels, easily enough to overwhelm your planetary defenses. The scale of the threat was worse than anyone had imagined." Emperor Kazan felt his silver skin darkening with stress as he contemplated trying to defend his people against such overwhelming odds. "However," Captain Chun continued, "Vex tactical doctrine relies heavily on intimidation and the assumption that their enemies will either surrender immediately or attempt conventional defensive strategies. They are not as adaptable as they like to believe, particularly when facing unexpected tactics." "What kind of unexpected tactics?" Captain Thoric asked, his deep voice rumbling with professional interest. Lieutenant Commander Torres leaned forward, his expression growing more animated. The Confederation fights like a natural disaster, massive, destructive, but ultimately predictable. They expect their enemies to either run away or stand and fight in traditional formations. They have trouble adapting when someone refuses to follow the expected script. Dr. Vasquez added, "Human military history is filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through superior mobility, unconventional strategies, and sheer determination. The key is to make the enemy fight on your terms rather than theirs." Princess Zara listened to this explanation with growing excitement. This was exactly what the ancient stories had described, humans finding ways to win impossible battles through cleverness and courage rather than superior firepower. "Are you offering to help us fight the Confederation?" she asked directly. The three humans exchanged glances before Captain Chun answered carefully. "Princess, our ship carries advanced sensors, communication equipment, and defensive systems. We also have extensive knowledge about Vex weaknesses and tactical limitations. What we do not have is a large military force or heavy weapons platforms. But you are willing to stay and help us plan a defense?" Emperor Kazan pressed. "Your Majesty," Captain Chun replied, 200 years ago, several alien civilizations helped humanity survive our darkest period. They asked for nothing in return except that we remember their kindness and pass it forward when the opportunity arose. We consider this to be such an opportunity." The simple sincerity of this statement affected everyone in the room. Here was a species that had every reason to avoid galactic conflicts, yet they were willing to risk their lives to help strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. "What would you need from us?" Emperor Kazan asked. Dr. Vasquez consulted a small tablet device. "Complete technical specifications for your defensive systems, detailed maps of strategic locations throughout the Empire, and access to your most experienced military commanders. We also need to understand exactly what resources you have available, both military and civilian. And in return?" the Emperor inquired. Captain Chun stood up, her brown eyes reflecting a determination that reminded everyone present of the legendary human warriors from the ancient stories. "In return, Your Majesty, we help you prove that the Vex Confederation is not invincible. We show the galaxy that courage and intelligence can triumph over brute force and intimidation." As she spoke these words, Princess Zara felt something awakening inside her, not just hope, but a fierce desire to fight for her people and their way of life. Whether they won or lost, they would not surrender without making the Confederation pay dearly for their aggression. The Age of Legends, it seemed, was about to begin again. The next morning brought a flurry of activity throughout the palace as human and Zarian military specialists worked together to develop a defense plan. Princess Zara found herself fascinated by the way the humans approached problems differently from anyone she had ever met. While Zarian thinking tended to be systematic and methodical, the humans seemed to thrive on creative chaos, jumping between ideas and building solutions from unexpected combinations of resources. Captain Chun had established a command center in one of the palace's technical wings, where holographic displays showed real-time information about both friendly and enemy forces. Dr. Vasquez worked with Zarian engineers to modify defensive systems, while Lieutenant Commander Torres consulted with Captain Thoric about ground-based tactics. "The key to surviving this," Captain Chun explained to the assembled War Council, "is to make the Vex fight multiple small battles instead of one large one. Their doctrine assumes they can overwhelm any resistance through concentrated firepower, but they become much less effective when forced to divide their attention." Emperor Kazan studied the tactical projections with growing concern. "Captain, even with your modifications to our defenses, we are still vastly outnumbered. How can we possibly force them into the kind of engagements you describe?" "By making them chase shadows, Your Majesty," Lieutenant Commander Torres replied with a grin that made him look much younger. "We give them targets they cannot ignore, but when they try to engage, those targets either disappear or turn out to be much more dangerous than expected." Princess Zara leaned forward, intrigued by this concept. "You mean deception? Making them think we are weaker or stronger than we actually are?" "Exactly," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Vex commanders are trained to assess threats based on visible military strength. They see a certain number of ships or defensive platforms and calculate the odds accordingly. But they have trouble adapting when those calculations turn out to be wrong. Captain Chun activated a new display showing the outer system where the Confederation fleet was gathering. According to our intelligence, they plan to begin their assault in approximately 18 hours. This gives us a very narrow window to implement our strategy. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was unlike anything the Zarian Empire had ever attempted. Instead of concentrating their forces around the capital world for a defensive stand, they would spread their ships throughout the system in small groups, designed to harass and confuse the advancing Vex fleet. Each group would be equipped with sensor decoys that would make single ships appear to be entire squadrons on enemy displays. When the Vex moved to attack these false targets, the real ships would either withdraw to new positions or reveal hidden weapon systems that would inflict maximum damage before disappearing again. Meanwhile, Princess Zara had volunteered to coordinate civilian evacuation efforts, working with human advisors to move non-combatants to secure locations throughout the system. This was not just a humanitarian effort. The evacuation ships would also carry sensor equipment that would help track Vex movements and provide intelligence to the scattered defense groups. Princess, Captain Chun approached her during a brief break in the planning session. I want you to understand that this strategy depends heavily on timing and coordination. If even one element fails to perform as expected, the entire plan could collapse. Zara looked up from the evacuation schedule she had been reviewing. Captain, are you concerned that my people do not have the courage for this kind of fighting? Not courage, Captain Chun replied carefully. But this type of warfare requires a willingness to take risks that might seem foolish to more conventional military thinking. Your forces will need to trust the plan even when their immediate situation looks hopeless. This was exactly the kind of challenge that the ancient stories had described. Humans seemed to specialize in situations where logic suggested surrender, but determination and faith in their comrades allowed them to achieve the impossible. My people have lived in peace for a very long time, Princess Zara admitted, but they are not cowards. When they understand what we are fighting for, they will find the strength to do whatever is necessary. That evening, as the final preparations were completed, Zara stood once again on her crystal balcony watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vex fleet was preparing for what they assumed would be an easy conquest. They expected to find a weak empire that would either surrender immediately or offer only token resistance before being overwhelmed. Instead, they were about to encounter something that had not been seen in this part of the galaxy for centuries. A desperate defense guided by human tactical brilliance and fueled by the kind of courage that refused to accept defeat. Captain Chun joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of a warm beverage that Dr. Vasquez had prepared from ingredients found in the palace kitchens. In human culture, she said, offering 1 cup to the princess, we have a tradition of sharing a final meal with our comrades before a difficult battle. The drink was unlike anything Zara had tasted before, slightly bitter, but with an underlying warmth that seemed to spread through her entire body. Captain, may I ask you something personal? Why did humans disappear from the galaxy for so long? What happened that made your people withdraw from contact with other civilizations? Captain Chun was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the light of the distant stars. 2 centuries ago, we trusted too much in the goodness of others. We believed that all species shared our values of justice and compassion, and we made alliances based on those assumptions. When we discovered how wrong we were, the cost was almost everything we had built. The Confederation, among others. There are many ways for a civilization to be destroyed, Princess. Military conquest is just the most obvious. We learn that sometimes the greatest kindness you can show to others is to remain strong enough to protect them, even if that means making difficult choices about when and how to get involved. Zara thought about this as she sipped the strange human beverage. But you chose to get involved here. Why? Captain Chun smiled, the same expression of mixed happiness and sadness that Zara had noticed during their first meeting. Because sometimes The difficult choice is to risk everything for strangers who cannot protect themselves. Because sometimes standing aside and letting evil triumph is worse than fighting and losing. As they stood together looking out at the stars, Princess Zara felt a deep sense of connection with this remarkable human woman. Despite coming from completely different species and cultures, they shared the same fundamental values, the belief that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. "Captain," she said finally, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that having humans return to our part of the galaxy has already changed everything. Even if we lose, other worlds will learn that the Confederation can be challenged. Your people have given us something more valuable than military assistance. They have given us hope." Captain Chun raised her cup in what Zara recognized as a human gesture of salute. "Princess, your people have given us something equally valuable, the chance to be worthy of the legends." In a few hours, the Vex Confederation would learn that the galaxy still contained species willing to fight for their freedom. More importantly, they would discover that the age of easy conquest was coming to an end. The Vex Confederation fleet entered the Zarian system at dawn, their dark ships blotting out stars as they advanced in perfect formation toward the capital world. Admiral Vrak commanded the invasion from his flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with enough firepower to destroy entire cities. He had conquered 17 worlds for the Confederation, and none had offered more than token resistance once they saw the size of his fleet. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we are detecting minimal defensive activity around the capital world. Sensors show approximately 12 ships in defensive positions, consistent with intelligence estimates of their military weakness." Admiral Vrak studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. The Zarian Empire had clearly recognized the futility of resistance and positioned their few remaining ships for a symbolic last stand. This would be over quickly, leaving him free to begin the next phase of Confederation expansion. "Begin the attack," he commanded. "Focus all firepower on their defensive positions. I want this finished before midday." But as the Confederation fleet moved forward, something unexpected began to happen. The Zarian ships split up instead of fighting together, and what had appeared to be 12 vessels suddenly became dozens of smaller contacts scattered throughout the system. Sensor readings fluctuated wildly as new targets appeared and disappeared on the displays. "Admiral, we are having difficulty maintaining target locks," the tactical officer reported with growing confusion. "Multiple ships are showing identical energy signatures, but they cannot all be in the same location." From the human command center hidden deep within the palace, Captain Chen watched the Confederation's response with professional satisfaction. "Phase 1 is working perfectly. They're chasing sensor ghosts while our real ships move into position for the counterattack." Princess Zara monitored the civilian evacuation efforts while keeping one eye on the tactical displays. The plan was proceeding exactly as the humans had predicted. The Vex fleet was spreading out to chase multiple false targets, dividing their overwhelming firepower advantage into manageable pieces. "Princess," Lieutenant Commander Torres called from his station. "Evacuation Convoy 7 is reporting Confederation scouts moving to intercept. Should they proceed with the planned diversion?" This was one of the most dangerous parts of the strategy. Several civilian ships were serving as bait to draw Vex forces away from the real evacuation routes. The crews volunteering for these missions knew they might not survive, but they also understood that their sacrifice could save thousands of other lives. "Tell them to proceed," Zara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And remind them that their courage honors all our ancestors, high above the planet." The first real engagement of the battle began as Confederation forces moved to intercept what they thought was a major evacuation convoy. Instead, they found 3 heavily modified freighters equipped with experimental weapons designed by Dr. Vasquez and the Zarian engineers working together. The lead Vex cruiser opened fire with its main batteries, expecting to destroy the civilian vessels in a single salvo. Instead, the freighter's shields absorbed the attack and returned fire with weapons that should not have existed on civilian ships. The surprise was total, and by the time the Vex commander realized his mistake, Two of his escort vessels had been destroyed and his own ship was badly damaged. Admiral, the increasingly frantic tactical officer, reported to Admiral Vrak. The civilian ships are fighting back with military-grade weapons. Multiple contacts throughout the system are revealing hidden armament. Admiral Vrak snarled with frustration as he watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into chaos. His ships were spread across the system chasing targets that either disappeared when approached or turned out to be much more dangerous than expected. This was not how civilized species were supposed to fight. "Recall all units," he commanded. "We will regroup and attack their capital directly." Enough of these games. But regrouping proved more difficult than expected. Several of his squadron commanders reported that they were being harassed by small, fast ships that would appear just long enough to inflict damage before disappearing again. Others found themselves trapped in asteroid fields where the enemy seemed to know exactly where to position ambush. In the human command center, Captain Chun smiled as she watched the Confederation fleet's formation crumble. "Torres, signal all units to begin Phase 2. It is time to show them what concentrated force looks like when applied correctly." Throughout the system, the scattered Zarian forces began converging on predetermined coordinates. But instead of massing for a traditional fleet engagement, they formed into small hunter-killer groups designed to target specific Confederation vessels while avoiding the enemy's main firepower, the Terran survey ship. Endeavor played a crucial role in this phase, using its advanced sensors to coordinate attacks and provide real-time intelligence about Vex movements. Captain Chen had moved her ship to a position where it could observe the entire battlefield while remaining hidden behind one of the system's larger moons. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez reported from her station, "Confederation casualties are approaching 15%, and their formation coherence is degrading rapidly." Admiral Vrak is attempting to regroup around his flagship. "Perfect," Captain Chun replied. "Signal Princess Zara that it is time for the final phase." Princess Zara had been waiting for this moment in the palace's primary communication center, surrounded by diplomatic staff who would broadcast her message throughout the galaxy. When Captain Chen's signal arrived, she took a deep breath and activated the transmission system. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying across space to dozens of worlds. "I am Princess Zara of the Zarian Empire. For 3 centuries, my family has worked to build a civilization based on cooperation, mutual respect, and peaceful coexistence. Today, that civilization is under attack by the Vex Confederation, which believes that strength gives them the right to enslave others." The transmission was being picked up by news networks, diplomatic channels, and military communications throughout this region of the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, beings stopped what they were doing to listen to the young princess's words. "But today has also shown that bullies are not invincible," Zara continued. "With the help of allies thought lost to legend, we have proven that courage and determination can stand against overwhelming odds. The Confederation's fleet, which was supposed to crush us in a matter of hours, is instead learning what happens when free peoples refuse to surrender their values." Admiral Vrak received the transmission on his damaged flagship and felt a cold anger growing in his chest. This was supposed to be a quick, clean conquest that would serve as an example to other worlds considering resistance. Instead, it had become a public humiliation that would inspire further rebellion throughout the galaxy. "All ships," he broadcast to his remaining forces, "abandon current objectives and converge on the capital world. I want those transmission centers destroyed immediately." But as the Confederation fleet moved toward Zarian Prime for what Admiral Vrak hoped would be a decisive final assault, they found the enemy waiting for them in a way they had never encountered before, not as a desperate defensive force, but as confident warriors ready to protect everything they held dear. The final engagement began as Admiral Vrak's remaining forces approached Zarian Prime in a desperate attempt to salvage victory from the chaos of the day. Nearly a quarter of his fleet had been destroyed or disabled by the unconventional tactics employed by the combined human-Zarian forces, and his carefully planned invasion had devolved into a series of costly skirmishes. Throughout the system, Captain Chun watched from the Endeavor's bridge as the Confederation ships formed up for what appeared to be a traditional fleet assault on the planet's orbital defenses. "They're finally doing exactly what we want them to do," she told her crew. All their remaining ships in one formation, committed to a single objective. Princess Zara stood in the palace's primary defense center, surrounded by displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. Captain Thoric and the other military commanders had initially questioned the human strategy of allowing the Vex to get this close to the capital world. But now they understood the brilliance of the plan. "All defense platforms report ready," Captain Thoric announced, his deep voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "The modifications suggested by Dr. Vasquez have been successfully implemented." What Admiral Vrak did not know was that the orbital defense platforms surrounding Zarian Prime had been extensively modified over the past day. Using human technical expertise and Zarian manufacturing capabilities, they had been transformed from simple defensive weapons into sophisticated threat analysis systems capable of identifying and exploiting weaknesses in enemy ships. Dr. Vasquez had spent hours studying captured Vex technology and comparing it with the human database of Confederation capabilities. She had identified critical vulnerabilities in their shield systems and power distribution networks, weaknesses that could be exploited if attacked with precisely calibrated energy frequencies. Confederation fleet entering optimal range, the tactical officer announced. "All platforms have target locks." Princess Zara took a deep breath and opened a communication channel to all defending forces. "Defenders of Zarian Prime, today we fight not just for our world, but for the principle that free peoples should not be enslaved by those who worship only power. Remember the courage of our ancestors, remember the allies who came from distant stars to help us, and show the galaxy that some things are worth any sacrifice." The orbital defense platforms opened fire simultaneously, their modified weapons creating cascading failures throughout the Confederation fleet as carefully tuned energy pulses overloaded Vex shield generators and power systems. Ships that had seemed invulnerable moments before began suffering critical malfunctions as their own technology turned against them. Admiral Vrak watched in horror as his flagship's displays flickered and failed. "What is happening? How are they penetrating our defenses so easily?" His tactical officer struggled with failing equipment as he tried to answer. "Admiral, they appear to have detailed knowledge of our system vulnerabilities. The energy frequencies they are using are specifically designed to cause resonance failures in our shield matrices." On the Endeavor, Captain Chen coordinated the final phase of the defense with quiet efficiency. "All hunter groups, begin your attack runs. Target their command and control systems while their defenses are compromised." The scattered Zarian forces that have been harassing the Confederation throughout the day now revealed their true purpose. Instead of individual ships fighting desperate holding actions, they had been positioning themselves for coordinated strikes against specific targets. Each group had been assigned critical enemy vessels, and they attacked with the precision of surgeons rather than the fury of desperate defenders. Lieutenant Commander Torres, monitoring the engagement from his position in the palace, watched with professional admiration as the plan reached its climax. "Perfect execution," he murmured to himself. "They're hitting every target exactly when and where it will cause maximum disruption." Admiral Vrak found himself trapped in a nightmare scenario. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that should not have possessed the capability for such sophisticated tactics. The ships he had brought to terrorize another world into submission were being destroyed by a combination of technological innovation and tactical brilliance that he had never encountered before. "Admiral," his communications officer reported through the static of failing systems, "we are receiving surrender demands from the enemy fleet." The irony was not lost on Admiral Vrak less than 12 hours ago. He had been dictating surrender terms to the Zarian Empire. Now his own forces were facing annihilation unless they accepted defeat from the very people they had come to conquer. Princess Zara's voice came through the communication. System with calm authority. Admiral Vrak, your fleet has been defeated. Order your remaining ships to stand down and prepare to be escorted out of our system. Any vessel that continues hostile actions will be destroyed. For a long moment, the Confederation admiral stared at his tactical displays showing the wreckage of what had been the most powerful fleet in this part of the galaxy. The small force that was supposed to offer only token resistance had instead taught his supposedly invincible armada the meaning of true defeat. All ships, he finally broadcast, his voice heavy with humiliation, stand down and prepare for withdrawal. As the surviving Confederation vessels powered down their weapons and allowed themselves to be escorted to the edge of the system. Celebrations began throughout Zarian Prime, but in the human command center, the mood was more subdued. Captain Chen knew that this victory, however significant, was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. "Princess," she said as Zara arrived to thank the human advisors, "you and your people fought magnificently today. But the Confederation will not simply accept this defeat and leave you in peace. They will be back, probably with reinforcements and new tactics designed to counter what they learned here." Princess Zara nodded, her silver skin still showing the effects of the day's stress. "Then we will be ready for them. Today has shown our people that we are not helpless victims waiting for others to decide our fate. We can fight and we can win." Captain Chen smiled, recognizing the transformation that had taken place in the young princes over the course of the battle. "Your Highness, I think you understand now why humans disappeared from the galaxy for so long. Sometimes the greatest kindness is to teach others to defend themselves rather than simply defending them." Dr. Vasquez approached carrying a datapad filled with technical specifications. "Princess, we will be leaving detailed information about the modifications we made to your defenses, along with tactical manuals based on human military history. But the most important thing we can leave you with is the knowledge that victory is possible when people refuse to surrender their freedom." Over the following days, news of the Confederation's defeat at Zarian Prime spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in decades, a major power had successfully resisted Vec's expansion, and they had done so through a combination of courage, innovation, and alliance with species thought to be extinct. The battle became known as the Return of the Guardians, marking not just the humans' reappearance in galactic affairs, but the beginning of a new era in which aggressive empires would find their victims much less willing to submit. Quietly to conquest, Princess Zara, standing once again on her crystal balcony, watched the stars with new eyes. Somewhere out there, the Terran survey ship Endeavor was continuing its mission, carrying word of the victory to human colonies and allied worlds throughout the galaxy. And somewhere else, other species facing their own struggles against oppression would learn that legends could become reality when people found the courage to make them true. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of human-inspired resistance had begun.